I'm a doctoral student in the Interdisciplinary Health Sciences program and a graduate assistant in the statistics lab. In my day job, I'm a bioinformatics analyst for ICF, a government consulting firm where I support the National Library of Medicine's bioinformatics team on their clinicaltrials.gov consultant. But in a previous life, I was a research and evaluation consultant in the social marketing division. We primarily did health communications projects for a variety of health and human services divisions like the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, National Cancer Institute, and Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. And so my work with these organizations showed me that people pay lip service to data-driven and evidence-based projects, but often struggle to put that into practice. To be fair to them, most of our clients and colleagues were communications or marketing professionals, not PhD level researchers, and they've never taken graduate statistics classes. They didn't know what a confidence interval was or why it was important. And so the onus was really on us to meet them where they were and communicate data and evidence in accessible, engaging ways. So we in the research team had to communicate complicated statistical information about quality of evidence to people without our backgrounds and context. Here's an example of a data visualization we made for a CDC client using secondary data that the CDC provided. Okay. So why I think about data visualization, good data visualization is important. It communicates complicated statistical information, even if your audience doesn't have all the context or expertise that you do. So if you're listening to this talk, you're probably a researcher and understand the value of data, but I want to challenge you to think more about how you visualize that data. So visualization is an incredibly important tool for understanding data, and when communicating complex information, we want to use every tool in our toolbox, and that includes our audience's visual processing systems. So here's a little lesson from neuroscience. It's a core one for learning about the world, and engaging with it will help communicate these complicated points. So here's a little figure of the brain. You can see the size of the visual cortex, quite large. That's what we want to take advantage of. So of course, I'm from the IHS cohort, and we have to give a plug to interdisciplinary research. Data visualizations have a lot of value here. So statisticians do not have a monopoly on data visualization, but you can work with them. So you want to be familiar with the methodologies and best practices. And as I mentioned above, a core challenge of interdisciplinary research is communication across discipline, and data visualizations are great for communicating complex information. Their data and visualizations and images are a universal language. Also, methods in reporting may differ across disciplines, and creative visualizations will help bridge that guide. And data visualizations have played a key role throughout history, and I want to share an example that I learned recently. So this is the ghost map that John Snow, considered to be the father of epidemiology, developed to help people understand the Broad Street cholera outbreak. So for the 2020 IHS cohort is reading the ghost map for Dr. Dennett's health systems course, and in this book and talks that Johnson and the author gives on the topic, he credits this map with beginning to change opinions about prevailing theories of cholera away from the miasma theories that is caused by bad air and towards understanding theories of germs in the water. So it map really captures how the deaths drop off outside of the coverage area from the Broad Street pump, and importantly, the coverage area is not the area that is most geographically close. It's the most close by walking distance through the streets. So it kind of begs the question about what impact our data could be having if we visualized it correctly and communicated it effectively. And this is a powerful example, but we've come a long way since then. I want to share some cool examples of data visualization in the media and some of the novel communications approaches that they're using. So news organizations have really embraced the power of data visualization to enhance reporting, taking advantage of how common data is in our world and developments in technology to add statistical evidence and information to the reporting. So outlets like 538 and Fox have risen to prominence because of their creativity conducting analysis and visualizing data. So for example, here is 538's election forecast, and for this, they thought really hard about how people just kind of in their minds round up or down probabilities and how to communicate, things that have a 10% chance of happening happen all the time, like so people hit 50-yard field goals, or Steve Nash misses a free throw, something like that. Here's an example from the New York Times of how middle-class jobs change over time. This takes advantage of a data visualization technique called small multiples, which we'll talk about later. Here's an advantage from Fox about how the tax brackets have changed over time. And these are so cool. So we can see the innovative work demonstrating how difficult. We can also see innovative work demonstrating how difficult but important it is to communicate information with the general public through the coronavirus pandemic. So some of the most effective communication efforts have used data visualizations. In fact, you've probably seen some of these because they've been shared virally, pun not intended. So here's an example from the New York Times showing the frequency and occurrence of deaths in a powerful way, just visualizing what 500,000 Americans looks like. Here's a visualization from our data showing cases over time and comparing some countries. And it uses log scales to communicate exponential growth. And it enables us to see which countries have outbreaks ongoing and which ones we might be able to learn from. Here's an example of the COVID tracking project from the Atlantic, which includes all the key metrics that you might want in very shareable formats. And other examples, outlets have used data visualizations to communicate complex infectious disease modeling principles simply and effectively. So here's a data visualization from the Washington Post showing how infected and susceptible people interacting can lead to disease spread and what happens when you institute social distancing effectively, holding people still. And so hopefully growth in the data visualization field and more work in this area contributes to improved data literacy among the public and makes their job a little easier. So unfortunately, we're not going to learn how to make those visualizations here. Those are a little more complicated in advance, but we're going to take a step back and look at discuss some best practices for data visualization, really drawing from the communication field. So here are kind of the core things you want to keep in mind when planning messages generally, but data visualizations in specific. So number one is know your audience. What are their expectations and customs related to data visualization? What is their level of comfort with numbers and statistics? What channel or platform are you trying to reach them through? So for example, if it's online, you can use interactive data visualizations. If it's through a journal, you might have to be more restrictive with the colors you choose because people might print them in black and white, things like that. So the next principle is to know your message. What are you trying to communicate? Are you trying to inspire action or inform strategic decision making? If so, what actions should they take based on the data? What is your level of uncertainty? Is it important to communicate that? Usually for scientific audiences, it is, or that a lot of outlets have gotten into trouble communicating about COVID and not misrepresenting their level of certainty about, if you think about some of the early forecasts or stuff, and that can lead to people misrepresenting the data or misunderstanding the data what you're trying to communicate. So, and then know your data. What is the structure? What variables do you have? What format are they in? What, if any, issues does your data have that the audience needs to know about? And then, of course, what is the relationship between your variables? So these also, while you can tackle each component yourself, they represent an opportunity for interdisciplinary work. So example from my time in the communications field, the research team will work with the analytics team to build audience profiles that we will kind of target messages that the marketing and communications team develop towards. And then the research team would work with the analytics team to design, and we had a creative team to develop data visualizations. So once you've kind of mastered these areas, you can start to build your own data visualization. So a great place to start is choosing the format of the visualization or how the elements you want to communicate well. For this, it's helpful to understand which elements of the visualization are most effective. Researchers have studied this. One of the formative research papers on data visualization is from 1984. The authors Cleveland and McGill titled the paper Graphical Perception, Theory, Experimentation, and Application to the Development of Graphical Methods. They showed people different types of visualizations and asked them to make judgments about the values and relationships between the values. Then they recorded the results and compared how accurate participants were across different types of relationships and visualizations. These are the figures that they reported in the paper. So they found that the easiest thing for the brain to perceive is position, so where one item is relative to another. The next easiest thing to interpret was positions along non-aligned axes, as long as the scale is the same. So these are the examples. These are an example of this. Graphs are small multiples. So even when there's so much data, it can be relatively easy to pick out patterns from this because of the common scales and context. It's easy to compare across the different figures. Next came length, and then direction that lines were taking, and then angles. Relative difficulty interpreting angles is the reason some people in the data visualization community don't like pie charts, despite the fact that they're everywhere, right? So pie charts, I think, are largely fine for 3 or fewer categories, or when differences are large. More than 3 categories or small differences between categories can be much more difficult to interpret. For example, trying to tell the difference between like a 33% and a 40% on a pie chart is harder than on a bar chart. So we've all seen this. Don't do it. Basically, that's basically impossible to interpret. So after that, they found visualizations comparing area, volume, angles of curvature were the most difficult to interpret. And then last were shading and color saturation. So these concepts are related to concepts from neuroscience, where visual processing elements called pre-attentive attributes, or attributes that are processed at a very basic level in the visual cortex. And we can really leverage these in our data visualizations. And these attributes can include, again, position, color, size, shape. And we can use them especially to group or differentiate items. And there are some best practices from kind of the design world where you can make sure that these pre-attentive attributes come through in your data visualization. Okay. The first thing first is to keep it simple. There's a point where adding information makes your figure harder to read, and I think that point comes earlier than you think. Data visualization is like, data communication is like other types of communication where, simpler, more accessible is better. Decide which elements you need to communicate your point and eliminate unnecessary information. Can be thought of like clutter. So, and white space and simpler elements lower the cognitive load that's required to read and understand data visualization. So the next thing is to group similar things or things you want your audience to compare together. These categories can be united by sharing shapes, colors, sizes, or physical proximities. Like we want to compare all of these bars to each other within these categories. So they group them that way. And so this is an example of the data visualization. So use tools at your disposal to communicate meaning. So colors are a great example of this. The universal traffic light system, where green means good, yellow medium, and red bad, instantly communicates that meaning. There are gender conventions related to colors. So pink or red, or you can communicate women, blue can communicate men. I kind of touched on this earlier, but the only exception to this, but there are some exceptions to this rule. You want your figures to be printable and understandable in black and white in case someone needs to print them off of a website, or a journal prints them in black and white, or the popularity of e-readers is growing. I read a lot of my stuff on a Kindle. That's black and white as well. So visualizations need to be compatible there. Color blindness is also a consideration. There are online tools you can use to determine if a design is accessible to colorblind people. Shapes are another attribute you can use to convey meaning and add contextual information. You can use different symbols to represent different groups. Size can communicate meaningfulness, especially when you're not trying to compare items with each other. The next is make sure your scales are consistent and accessible. Manipulating scales is one of the most misleading things you can do with your data visualization. You turn you actually turn the pre-attentive attributes against correct comprehension. So the figure on this side over here has scales that might be that might go from 85 to 90% or whatever, and then this goes from, but when you scale it from 0 to 100%, you tell a much more accurate picture of your data. It makes it look like there's a bigger difference than there really is. So okay. So use labels only when, legends only when necessary, but be careful with those because they can really add clutter. If you have to write a paragraph to explain your visualization, it's probably not simple enough, and you can make it more simple. But make sure your audience has all the necessary context, and if necessary, include it in the visualization. So once we've mastered best practices, we can start to get creative. Again, know your audience. Academic audiences prefer standard data visualizations with things like confidence intervals, but for certain audience, like the general public, especially those sensitive to aesthetics or who appreciate design and creativity, you have more freedom to experiment. So in the IHS cohort, we love a good TED Talk. Here are some of my favorites about how to think creatively when visualizing data. So here's Hans Rosling in the middle with the best stats you've ever seen, David McCandless with the beauty of data visualization, and Ted Evans at TEDxOU with moving beyond data visualization. And these are a little older, but you can really see the foundation for a lot of the work that's going on in the data visualization space in these talks. So here are some examples of creative visualizations I use from time to time. These are not like the examples we saw at the beginning of the talk, except they're great ways to punch up more common figures. And I also want to say here, I owe a great deal to Dr. Stephanie Evergreen from this area, but I'll highlight her more in the additional resources section. So back-to-back graphs, also called population pyramids, are great for when you're trying to communicate information about the distribution of certain factors across different groups, and you can also combine them with stacked bar charts to really show both how well and how poorly people are doing, and those are two different bits of information you want to include. So dot plots are really cool. They take advantage of the human strength at calculating position, and almost everyone intuitively gets what they're trying to communicate. You can really show kind of the change between over time, pre or post, using these, I think, more effectively than bar charts. If you're looking for another bar chart alternative, lollipop graphs are great. Again, they're show what we're most interested in usually, which is the position at the end of the bar. They're very clean. They can be horizontal or vertical. So I like to use them. And then when you have information about subsets and how they're related to the whole, overlapping bar charts are a great way to communicate that information. There are person bar charts, which are really cool. They're take advantage of shapes to convey, again, an extra bit of information. And they're best for when you're trying to communicate information about relatively rare occurrences or smaller numbers. So for example, in this figure, we can see, it instantly stands out that not very many people, or that there have been a lot of people in history, but a surprisingly large amount of them are alive today. And then don't underestimate the power of big numbers to stand out and get attention, especially in general public facing communications. Just you instantly see what's important. And then when preparing for this talk, Dr. Loyola challenged me to expand my definition of a data visualization to anything that communicates numerical information, which I thought was a really good point. So For example, here is an example from UNICEF with empty chairs for children who miss school, or you may have seen images of empty stadiums to communicate the number of deaths from COVID. I think those are very powerful considerations for scientific audiences. So when communicating with scientific or research audiences, you still want to follow communications best practices that we mentioned above. But you also want to communicate elements that may be expected in each visual. So the ones that communicate uncertainty, like confidence intervals or indications of statistical significance. But you also have more freedom to make more complicated data visualizations. You can conduct mathematical transformations or include more elements in your figure just because your audience is more data literate and competent. So data visualization principles we discuss here can really help in the research process too. So you can think of yourself as an audience and your data as a communicator and how you would like to receive information. And visualizing data works the same for you as it does for audience. So it's best practices to visually inspect your data before conducting your analyses, and many diagnostics for analyses are visual, such as QQ plots. We do these visualizations to capture information that the summary statistics don't. So this is a good example. This is Anscombe's quartet. These are 4 different data plots that give basically the same summary statistics, but if you didn't look at the scatter plots here and just ran an analysis on this data, you would likely miss the true nature of the relationship and waste time building models that don't fit. So there are a variety of tools that you can use to visualize their data. Which tool you pick will depend on your level of expertise, the format of your data, the type of visualization you want to create. These tools fall into several categories. If you're interested in data analysis and visualization, you should pick at least one from each category and do a deeper dive to them. We're going to highlight some specific tools. There are many more tools in each category. I'm just including the ones that I'm most familiar with or have experience using. So statistical packages, we're all familiar with these. Common examples include SPSS, SAS, Stata, R, Minitab, JMP, and others. So I personally use R and Stata. Stata has a robust data visualization system using both programming and drop-down menus. I know SAS and SPSS are the same. R is more complicated to learn, but a little bit more flexible and powerful once you do. Again, these are most helpful for the pre-research process that we talked about earlier, where you visualize scatter plots and histograms of your data prior to conducting analyses or to conduct diagnostics. Some of these have less graphical flexibility than others. So R can produce very pretty data visualizations, but you can definitely tell what comes out of Stata because it looks like pretty standard output from a statistical package. But these are flexible and can generate the majority of the visualizations you need, especially for research papers and publications. But they lack the ability to customize aesthetically and may not be recommended for 9 visualizations you're generating for general public or non-scientific audiences. So programming, there are hundreds of programming options, more created every day. A lot of them have data visualization capabilities, but I'm going to focus on R and Python, a little bit on ArcGIS, even though it's kind of a weird fit for this category, because they're 2 of the most popular tools used by data scientists and engineers. And also, I have some experience with them. So I mentioned R above. It straddles multiple worlds. It's commonly used for data analysis, like statistical packages, but has much more flexibility due to its code-based structure. It's also open source and free. So if you have time and are willing to learn, there are many packages specifically designed for data visualization, such as ggplot. These are some examples from the BBC of data visualizations that they've created using R. Most of the visualizations that we see in our median examples are created using either R or Python. Okay, so Python is the most programming focused of the tool here. It's very code-based. definitely requires something of a coding or programming background to really get the most of. But it's one of the most popular platforms for data visualization among data visualization scientists and coding-oriented researchers. It's relatively easy to learn if you have, especially if you have that coding background. And you can use libraries and pre-made code bases like Matplotlib or Seaborn or Bokeh to develop data visualizations. It's also open source and free, and there are plenty of development environments that you can use depending on your level of comfort and personal preferences. ArcGIS is a favorite of Dr. Laiola's. It's a powerful tool for graphical representation of geographic locations. It's unique and straddles categories between programming and stats packages. It has one job, but it does it very well. Especially relevant for epidemiology or research concerned with mapping diseases or other phenomenon around physical locations. Would have been very helpful for John Snow. Back in the day, you wouldn't have had to hand draw that map. The downside is the lack of flexibility and the fact that it's not easy to visualize uncertainty. You can't include confidence intervals and instead have to rely on things like overlapping color gradients, which can be difficult to interpret, especially depending on how much you have going on in your visualization. So these are dashboards, some examples of dashboard tools. These are some of my favorites. They make very pretty data visualizations. And they're also very interactive, and you can link data sources and have them automatically update and create basically things that track key performance indicators over time and show you exactly kind of how your organization is performing. They can either perform a snapshot or do the tracking over time. They're a staple of modern project management and are often referred to in the context of business intelligence. So many organizations that you may work for have these already built. Some modern database platforms like Salesforce create them automatically, but if you're an evaluator or a data scientist, you may be tasked with building them yourself. So here's another piece of data visualization. You may have seen the COVID tracking dashboard from Johns Hopkins University. And every state and local government has developed some form of this. So this one was actually developed in ArcGIS, which shows the power and flexibility of the program, but most of them were created in Tableau or some of these other software. Tableau is one of the most common and of the data visualization dedicated software. It's powerful, but it can be expensive. It has a mix of programming or drop-down based methods you can use to create data visualization. So this is a data visualization I created for a CDC client, the Office of Smoking and Health, to track orders to their catalog of anti-smoking PSAs and materials. The hex map is another fun creative data visualization. It enables you to see kind of details in the small northeastern states that are hard to see on a traditional map. Tableau also has a free version where the catch is that you make both your dashboard or your visualizations and your data set publicly available. It's fun to play around with and can be great to learn on, but problematic if you have proprietary data. So the data visualizations that people develop using Tableau Public are posted online. Browsing the Tableau Public gallery is a very fascinating way to learn about data visualization and see all the great work that's out there. I like to kill time using that. So Microsoft's Power BI is another option. It's cheaper and easier to use for general audiences, where Tableau is really more for data analysts and scientists. It also has a free version with a similar drawback where you have to make your dashboard publicly available. Google Studio is the free alternative to Tableau and Power BI, but almost as powerful. It links especially well with web APIs or data systems. In my consulting life, we used it to develop dashboards and visualizations for the National Cancer Institute. If you're interested in learning about how to develop interactive data visualizations, it's a great place to start. However, there's there is no need to get fancy or buy expensive software to make interesting, creative, and effective data visualizations. To quote Dr. Lyorala's professor that he likes to quote, there's no need to use a John Deere when a lawnmower will do the trick. So you're probably already familiar with Microsoft Office's suite of tools, and we're going to focus today on Excel. It's probably the tool that came to mind immediately when I introduced this section. It's a great software for basic analyses and data visualization. It's no different. There's also a world of Excel macros and other customizations you can use to develop databases and dashboards based on it. I've seen some very cool dashboards that were very sophisticated and made in Excel. The downside, of course, is its lack of raw power or flexibility. It also lacks some of the aesthetic customization options of other software. Infographics are an increasingly popular form of data visualization, and there are many great free tools available, so you don't have to go broke paying for things like InDesign. You can create them in Microsoft Office products like PowerPoint, Word, and Publisher. Canva is a great free online tool that you can use as well. Google Docs also has a suite of Office tools that you can use to track your data. Here's an example of a data visualization I made in Google Sheets. It tracks my student loan debt from the Johns Hopkins MPH. It's one of the reasons I'm so grateful for this TA ship. Okay, so here are some additional resources to get started or that I would recommend checking out. So Dr. Stephanie Evergreen, I mentioned her earlier in the talk, is actually an alumnus of the WMU School of Education. She has developed a significant following in the evaluation community and is a big inspiration for this talk. She presents regularly and leads workshops at the American Evaluation Association and other related conferences. She also has several books, a company that consults on data analysis and visualization and conducts several data visualization academies a year. There are other books that are more classic, so The Visual Display of Quantitative Information by Edward Tufte. Storytelling with Data is a great book. BBC Visual and Data Journalism Cookbook for Art Graphics is a great place to start if you're looking for more information on art. Witchgraph.com is just a really helpful tool as well. It gives you really basic information about, based on the structure of your data, which visualization is best to use. So there's also a significant body of literature developing around best practices in data visualization. It's a very interdisciplinary field, bringing in professionals from health sciences, public health, computer science, communication. So if any of you work on health devices or clinical support tools or Internet of Things projects, there's great research on how to present your data to patients or providers to encourage desired behavior changes or outcomes. I've worked a little bit on these projects in the past and would love to work on them more in the future. So thank you. That brings us kind of to the end of this talk, but of course I have to give a plug for the Statistical Consulting Laboratory. We have a variety of abilities related to modeling and data analysis and visualization and planning. We can help you learn how to use data visualizations or plan any aspect of your data analysis. If you want to explore the statistical help that we offer for your research project, please reach out to Dr. Lyorala or Dr. Tyler with your questions. Their contact information is below if you don't already have it. Lastly, stay tuned for the second in a series of talks from the Stats Lab. This one will be on big data. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Cameron. I think we have time. Does anyone have questions? We should open it up to questions.
I have a question. I'm sorry. This is Ellen. I have a question, Cameron. You talked about different colors representing different genders, and I wondered if there's been any research done on non-binary individuals, so they don't, idea of what is male, what is female is certainly more flowing or in flux.
Right. Yeah, you can communicate that using kind of a combination of red versus blue, or red and blue, or a purple, or the rainbow color pattern is associated very, like, culturally very associated with that group. So recommend using that if you can in your visualization. But I'm not aware of any research.
Okay, thank you.
So will these slides be available for others to see them as well?
I'm not sure how this works. This is my first talk. Dr. Tyler, can I send them to you and you can put them somewhere? Or?
I actually recorded it.
Oh,
So
nice.
What we've done in the past, and I guess I'll leave it up to you, Cameron, but what we've done in the past is if people have missed the talk and inquire, then I send them a link to the recording.
Mhm. Okay. Yeah. I give permission. I'll sign whatever you need to have that happen.
Because then they have the slides too, because it's all part of the recording, but they also have the benefit of what you've said about it, which I think is really helpful.
Okay.
So we haven't posted it out there just because we kind of made the decision because some of the talks have been, what do I want to say? People have had very specific questions about their own work. So we haven't made the decision to broadly post, but generally people will contact me and then I'll share.
Okay. Yeah, I tried to go a little bit broader with this talk, so maybe it'll have a bit of a wider audience.
Yeah, I certainly had the opportunity to post this on our Facebook department Facebook page, for example. We have a pretty large following there. Maybe you can talk about that offline, perhaps. But I think there's opportunities for that to really. This has been, you covered a lot of area here, which is really interesting. There's something I had no idea about. So, from a purely information, getting me up to speed was really, really good. I actually started taking notes halfway through, and I was like, oh my gosh, it's coming pretty fast. So I'm like, I hope there's slides later. But if the recording's even better yet. So yeah, I have to be talked through this really. And so
Okay.
Yeah, we can talk about it.
okay.
Other questions? Yeah, I agree with Karen. I was taking notes too, but you presented, you touched on many, many broad topics, right? That clearly you can delve way into.
Yeah.
But that was good. That's useful because then I think at least people have an idea where, they can kind of compartmentalize some of their questions.
And also those dot graphs, those before your lollipop graphs. I saw that ones. I'm like, that looks a lot more current and contemporary than doing bar chart stuff.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, you know what? I got to start making the transition over. I'm no longer doing overhead black and white slides either. So I guess this is the next evolution. So to keep things fresh, you have to start playing in those playgrounds. So you look like you're not, I'm wearing this year's model clothes at least, all that kind of stuff. So
yeah, there's, as we can see in the media example, there's a lot of innovation and work happening in this space. So if you want to communicate with a wider public, then I think your stuff needs to be pretty good.
Yeah, it also represents a level of sophistication and awareness of what's out there.
Yeah,
I think that transcends what you're trying to say, just puts you in a different environment. I think that's important to have that there. Thanks.
Oh, thanks for the opportunity. This is great.
And
love to share.
And when is that next talk? You referenced it.
We don't have a date.
Okay.
Yeah, still in development, but it's planned. Yes.
I think word will get out about the quality of this talk, and I think we're going to see more and more interest once people start to become more aware.
Yeah, that's the hope. We want to get our capabilities out there and help the faculty and students at the health science colleges as much as possible.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So that's something for future too, as we talk about how we want to share these, is to think about kind of publicizing posts, right? Hey, look what you missed. I mean, we could do that. You know, to whet people's appetite about the next one. So maybe that's something we think about too.
And also, people may have something scheduled right now, so they couldn't attend it. But you recorded it, so maybe if you attach the recording to that as well. So, or we have a spot. What we can do, we like to post this on our department webpage as well, so we can always reference them to drive people to our webpage.
And link it to the college.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Cross linkages, yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so people know there's a site, you go there, these things are there, and they can, at their own time, whatever, but there's a constant reinforcement. And so even on if we do a Facebook page, we can say, go to the college or the department for this stuff here.
Yeah,
okay.
I think that's probably the way to go.
Right. Cool.
Okay.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, getting the word out is the, you know, I mean, so much comes in people's inboxes, and I mean, just kind of getting it noticed. So as many creative ways as we can think of doing that, I'm all for.
Okay. All right, I gotta go. I'm gonna call. See ya.
Okay.
Bye.
Okay. Yeah, if there are no more questions, then I'm gonna go eat up some lunch. Thank you so much again for the opportunity. Yeah.
Thanks so much, Cameron. We look forward to more.
All right. Sounds good. Bye.
Bye-bye.